Hey there, folks. We're here with another episode of Unfinished Business Television. I guess you could call this a special episode because it's not exactly a deep dive. It's more a television review of a show that I'm sure most of you have seen. And we're going to be talking about Quiet on the Set, the dark side of kids' TV. All about Dan Schneider and Nickelodeon kids television programming, and what went on behind the scenes in the dark side. If you don't know, I am Jeff Gallish, Unfinished B2, and with me as always is Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions.
I will never watch Head of the Class the same way ever again.
Well, really, there's no reason to watch it again in the first place. Okay, for those of you who don't know, this is a 4-part series, soon to be 5-part, about basically Dan Schneider's reign at Nickelodeon, behind the scenes show running shows like iCarly, the Amanda Bynes show, all that. Kenan and Kel, though they don't really go into too much about Kenan and Kel. Drake and Josh, and basically his beginnings, from Head of the Class, where he was born, and, having a production company with Brian Robbins, who's now the head of Paramount. And basically, they worked together. And then finally, I guess, Dan Schneider finally got to be a showrunner on his own. And, with all this great power, so did his ego. Where basically on a lot of these shows, there's a lot of inappropriate sex jokes. There's a fetishizing especially of girls' feet. There's racism, whereas he can get close to and write for white kids, but he had more of a problem getting close to black children. And maybe questions about inappropriate relationships of sexual nature and romantic nature. Now, when this came out, I didn't know all the facts, but for years, there have always been like these YouTube documentaries behind the scenes that mentioned his inappropriate behavior and certain like material and scenes. And of course, there's always been the rumors of him, maybe having an inappropriate relation with Amanda Bynes and Jamie Lynn Spears, which is part of the reason why they believe Amanda Bynes went crazy, and that he's the secret father of Jamie Lynn Spears' first child, and things like that. And I'm not gonna say I took them with a grain of salt, but I saw what those documentaries were saying. And of course, there's the infamous documentary that keeps getting pulled off of YouTube, an open secret. Another thing I would say as a companion piece to the series, if you haven't seen it, watch it, because it also deals with a lot of pedophiles working behind the scenes in Hollywood. This one being more like a Bryan Singer and the child actor who was in First Kid with Sinbad, who's now a Bitcoin king. But if you can find it, definitely check that one out. But the powers that be keep having it taken down. This one is here to stay because it's on Max. The first one deals with Dan Schneider and his hiring practices and his inappropriate behavior with female writers. Like 2 female writers on the Amanda Show had to share basically one wage that a male writer would get, and that he'd request them to do line readings, but pretend like somebody's doing you from behind while you read the lines. And like people who had just came onto the show had seniority over these female writers. They would be taken into the boys club meeting, and also that one wouldn't even be paid. She would have to work 11 weeks, but only be paid for 6 weeks work. But she had to be there every day. And he threatened to ruin her career if he found out she was the one who turned him into the Writers Guild and stuff like that. I know this was more of a revelation for you because you were the one who was telling me all about this and how I had to watch it. So, Andre, talk about your feelings when it comes to this documentary series.
Well, I preface it like this. I grew up as a kid who watched Nickelodeon and the Nicktoons were my thing, as well as shows like Clarissa Explains It All, Hey Dude, You Can't Do That on Television, Double Dare I watched every day after school. So Nickelodeon was a very big part of my childhood. And I started kind of slowly dipping out of it in my teen years, like when you started getting into shows like Roundhouse and all that. And you know, and I knew of Dan Schneider from Head of the Class, as well as Brian Robbins. And I even saw Good Burger in the theater with my two cousins when that came out. So yeah, it's always been part of my childhood. But I've also heard about this stuff about Dan Schneider for quite a few years, when the Me Too movement started, and hearing about all those accusations that ultimately led to him getting pulled out of Nickelodeon. And then to see this documentary and what was really going on just from these different writers and the actors who worked on those shows. I mean, it was heartbreaking. I have not seen Sound of Freedom, but this was like Sound of Freedom 2.0 in my view. And it really outraged the shit out of me with everything that I just saw, with the abuse that these writers were taking, and then the stuff that was actually getting past network executives and censors. Whether it's the thing with, was it Selena Gomez or somebody with the potato?
Oh, Ariana Grande.
Yeah, Ariana Grande with the potato bit, or the thing with the feet, the stuff about Amanda Bynes, or even like the black kid with the phallic stuff on him that's not supposed to be that, but comes across that way. It's just like, what are these people doing? These are young kids in an environment that's supposed to be safe and protected, and with so much going on, it only fuels that ugliness that I have about Hollywood, that there are these pedophiles out there, that there are these monsters that are literally taking these kids and ruining their lives, and then you wonder why they're all screwed up. And then they want to single out certain individuals of power, and can't do it because these producers who have so much at stake, they can't do anything about it because they're pumping out this content like Dan Schneider was doing. And so it really disgusted me, really got me angry. And I was texting you back and forth every time I was watching this. And then the Drake Bell thing was like, holy shit, how are they letting this guy get away with what he was doing to this kid? And then for him to go to court, and then all these named people that we grew up watching on all these sitcoms that were defending this guy. It's like, this is why I hate Hollywood now, because you are defending these people and you're not holding them accountable. And thankfully, yeah, you get these things now that are bringing these issues to light, even though it's too late. But Jesus Christ, like, we have some serious work to do in this business to get it right.
Well, it's like, Brian Pack, he was part of an open secret, of being a working pedophile in Hollywood, and still keeps getting jobs on kids shows despite that. They didn't, in an open secret, they didn't go into like all these celebrities who had written letters on behalf of him. So this was the first time hearing about that when it came to him. But the fact that he was keep getting jobs, and he couldn't just have been like some guy working in the crew, because for Dan to actually write a character around him, Pickle Boy, that shows they had to have some kind of closeness, even though, he didn't write a letter for him when it came to his trial. And also the fact that, he never worked on supposedly another Dan Schneider production after that. But the fact was, you hadn't, not only him, but the other two people, that they were able to be on the crew of the show, even though it seems like they all have had pasts that show you that they were. And one of the things, I don't know if because maybe he wasn't part of the documentary or didn't want to be on camera, but a lot of people are now giving credit to Jerry Trainer, who was on iCarly, who would stay on sets even when he wasn't working, to make sure to protect his co-stars on his show. Even though he was on the iCarly reboot. But again, I would like to think he did that obviously for money, but also to keep protection over his co-stars. And then Dan Schneider going Iron Man 3 with his apology video, and then hiring somebody who you cast on a show to interview you is such a toothless, defense, and really thought people would believe him and all that. And then you have Kyle Massey's mother, out of all the people, trying to defend, saying, oh, it's the parents' fault that all that happened, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, I'm happy it didn't happen to your child, but that doesn't mean, he didn't treat other children. Well, it wouldn't happen to your child because, remember, he supposedly doesn't exactly like black kids. So, you were safe, and I'd be like, I think you should mind your own house when one of your sons is kind of accused of the same thing with an underage girl. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Because again, I'm not here to point fingers, but what I guess the thing I liked about the documentary was even pointing out, like, Katrina Johnson, who I watched the first few seasons of all that, and I remember her being on the show, and I remember her role at the beginning. She was like the Amanda Bynes. She was in almost every skit, even if she didn't need to be. And then all of a sudden, her role kept getting smaller and smaller. And then here comes Amanda Bynes, basically living out her career, all because, maybe Dan didn't feel comfortable, or maybe her parents did the right thing and were like, yeah, this friendship, a mentor-student thing doesn't feel right, And I'm liking that because now this is Dan Schneider is the new Weinstein now. I just hope that they also go after other people who might be in these same positions and accused of these same crimes, because the whole thing here was that Dan Schneider had an open kind of air policy of letting pedophiles in, even though he hasn't been accused of being a pedophile. It's just the inappropriateness of the material he was providing to children, and just his unfair work practices, his bigotry, his sexism, his misogyny. I mean, it all adds up to the same amount of guilt, even if, in a court of law, you haven't been accused of it. But it's just like how Jeanette McCurdy can't really talk about anything because she signed an NDA. Even in her autobiography, which was more about her mother, she gave hints at, calling her boss the creator, which let's face it, we all knew who it was. But, just how inappropriate he was and the pressure he would put on her. And that kind of favoritism kind of spilled over to, like, when they had the spinoff series, Sam and Cat, and Ariana Grande was allowed to do all this other extracurricular stuff because she had a pop career, whereas Jeanette McCurdy did not, but she wasn't allowed the same things of being late, not showing up on certain episodes, and not being penalized. So the whole thing is, obviously there's favoritism in Dan Schneider's world, especially when even the producers of What I Like About You had to, like, kind of force him off the show, where he was only name only and had no real creative power. And that shows where him and Amanda Bynes kind of parted ways, because after that, she had the show. She had those, like, string of movies like Sydney White. I forgot the one where she plays a boy.
She's the Man.
She's the Man. And then that one, that Love Wrecked, which went straight to home video. And then it seemed like after that, her career took a downturn. I don't know if it was mental illness or if it was drugs or a mixture of both. But that seems to be where she reached her breaking point, where they actually fired her off of Hall Pass. And then she put out a burner account where she accused John Travolta of certain things that I'm not going to repeat on here because we don't have a lawyer. But yeah, she made some accusations, as well as some accusations against Dan Schneider, where she didn't spell out, but she said that, that perverts ran Hollywood. And watching the clips now, obviously, you can see the sex joke. So Dan can't really defend himself against that, even though he might just say, oh, it was all in good fun. or maybe he just has this fetish of seeing what he can get away with and nobody saying anything. And
Well, you see, that's the other thing that pisses me off regarding his apology video, because one of the things I remember him saying was he couldn't understand why people were getting so outraged about jokes that were made like 10, 20 years ago, and now they're making such a big deal about it. Now, sure, we're in a culture that's very overly sensitive, and we're like going back and doing retrospectives on things and saying, well, this was, maybe it wasn't offensive then, but it is now. But you see, I look at, like, say, when I watch old wrestling matches or old promos back, like during like the Attitude Era of the WWE, and they were doing some very heavy, explicit stuff, but it was in your face. You knew the joke, you knew what was going on. Whereas this is a kid show, all the stuff that he produced, and you're throwing in very uncomfortable, subtle humor that is subliminal and literally just offensive. I mean, Ren and Stimpy, you thought was like over the top and crazy, and they were able to catch certain episodes that they didn't even put on air because it was too much. That's why the creator got fired from the series after a while, and they had to change showrunners for that. That was well documented in the Ren and Stimpy story, but here, this was all like under the table, and then to know what was going on during the making of these shows and what these writers were having to deal with, and the actors. It's criminal, and it shocks me this guy hasn't been fully investigated. They said they did an internal investigation, but not a criminal investigation. This guy's going to probably end up getting looked at again, and maybe the FBI's got to get involved because it's bad.
It's bad, but again, since it's all past and NDAs, it's more like a public shaming thing than I think any actual legal recourse that can be done. It's not going to be a Puffy situation of what's going on right now.
He's going to come to Dan Schneider's house.
Reading, looking. It's basically going to be like, well, you have to live with yourself, and you're going to be, I hope, a pariah when it comes to anybody like really dealing with you. So, and I could have swore he got more than $7 million when he left Nickelodeon at the time, because I even remember it being so shocking because he had given them hit after hit after hit, and then he's going to leave and they're just going to give him $7 million. I thought it was $27 million at the time. So but either way, the whole thing is. Other than that, when you get into the Drake Bell story, and especially with his father already not trusting Brian Peck, and then, Brian Peck basically grooming Drake, like, yeah, go with your mom, blah, 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 knowing the mother isn't going to pay as much attention, isn't going to be around as much, and then finally, sexually abusing him in that manner. And then just seeing the father's reaction, it's devastating because, he wanted to be there and protect his son. And it's sort of like the villain got over and got what he wanted. And now he has to live with, everything after, even though his son, forgives him and says it's not his fault. Still, that's still a heavy load to carry, knowing that happened. And then he only gets 6 years after all this, and again, all these people who defended him, and as Drake even points out, when it comes, well, maybe not in the documentary, but in interviews, like, it wasn't like he got letters from Will Friedle and Ryder Strong when they were teenagers and didn't know what was happening. They knew what this man was accused of, and what he might go to jail for, and you're sitting here saying, oh, it must be some kind of mistake, or some kind of, like, how does that happen, and using the Kevin Spacey defense, oh, I'm gay, like, that makes it any less, or is it supposed to be expected somehow? If anything, that's even more homophobic. It's, that would be like committing a crime and say, well, I'm black, so that's it. I'm supposed to commit crime? Is that what you're saying? So that's why I'm just like, it gets you angry. I mean, the fourth episode really wasn't needed because it just seemed to be more of a wrap up. The first three are the ones where they're like hitting you across the head with all this information. And I hope if it has to, it becomes like Surviving R. Kelly, where we have 21 parts. If it's, even if it's against other people other than Dan Schneider, because it's something that needs to be exposed. I mean, you've had stars like, I know Alexa Nicholas has been adamant on this because, she talks about other people who might have been trying to mess with underage girls. But also you have Allison Stoner, who was in all, the dancing white girl in all those movies and those Steve Martin and Bonnie Hunt Cheaper by the Dozen films. She doesn't work in Hollywood anymore because of things she saw when she was a child, inexperienced as a child. So it's obviously something that keeps happening, but everybody tries to sweep it underneath the rug. Even Seth Green, in a recent interview, he says nothing happened to him, but he was happy and lucky that he saw certain experiences and certain ways things could have gone, but he was lucky. He either made the right decision or his parents helped him to make the right decisions to not put himself in those positions or go to those certain parties or hang out with those certain people. So it's obviously a thing that's going to keep happening. But the problem is there's no protections put into place. It's just as the woman said, which to me was dumb, but I can understand her reasoning where that guy sent her daughter the pictures of himself naked, and the only reason she didn't report him was she didn't want to be a bad mother or be seen as a bad mother or get her daughter in trouble, not working, when the definition of being a good mother would have been to report him. But I understand she was trying to put her daughter or her daughter's career first. And sometimes that's questionable because is a career in that business worth it if that's what you have to put up with or deal with, So
I just wish that Brian Robbins could speak out on this. This is a guy that's known Dan Schneider forever. And yeah, I know he runs the big studio now, but he's also been there when a number of these incidents were taking place, and he ain't seen shit. So he needs to bring this up, because if you're going to do another part of this documentary and more outrage comes out, you got to get in front of this, man. Like, you got to take a stand here. You can't defend your friend forever if there's clearly some truth to all that's coming out right now.
But I like to think maybe that's why the partnership maybe broke up. He started seeing that behavior because he was with them for all that. And I guess maybe even Keenan and Kel, because he was there for Good Burger. But that is where they seem to have parted ways. And maybe he saw the storm coming, and that's why he pretty much moved on and went his own way with Eddie Murphy movies. And Dan was like, no kids. And he was like, okay, I'm out. Because now did Dan Schneider have any? Dan Schneider had nothing to do with Varsity Blues, right?
No, that was all Brian Robbins.
Okay, so at least, he can say, oh, I'm safe with that one. But yeah, he's going to have to make a comment, even if it's just one of those things you only see in print, where when I worked with him, everything was, everything seemed to be tip top, from the bottom down. And, as our business partnership matured, there were things I wanted to go do my own way. Take the way out where at least you can sit there and say, I didn't see anything,
Yeah, but he's got to do something, because right now you have people attacking his Instagram page with a picture of his wife. That's the last thing he posted, and everybody's like, "Oh, you need to talk. You need to answer for this." And like, okay, you got to come in front of this and maybe try to be the hero here.
Yeah, because if you keep basically not saying anything, they're going to think that you know something that you just don't want to talk. And I understand where your position is because, you're the head of a movie studio and you want to stay away from controversy as much as you can. But as the head of a studio, you also know what happens when there's bad rumors or there's controversy. You've got to deal with that head on because if you keep putting it off, it only makes it worse and makes you look more guilty.
And this is a guy that, he's been associated with kid stuff for years, not just on Head of the Class. But one thing I didn't know until I saw this one YouTube video was that him and Schneider, they co-hosted the first Kids' Choice Awards back in the 80s.
See, I didn't even know that, but I was wondering why they didn't mention Brian Robbins was the other person when they said Dan Schneider wrote an episode of Head of the Class. It's like, we all know who he wrote it with. And not to mention, not to even be joking, where's Arvid in all of this? Because he worked on Kenan and Kel. And
the only person from the cast that spoken out was Kimberly Russell, and she defended Dan Schneider.
Well, I don't know what their friendship has been like over the years.
I mean, not everybody hangs out with him all the time to really know.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
So that's why I'm like, when she knew him, he probably wasn't, oh, look at this underage girl. Or, hey, let me tell an inappropriate joke. But it's like, have you kept up a friendship since then with him? To know. And again, if you did, you're his friend. You're not, it's like everybody. Everybody has their work self and then their social self. So, the Dan Schneider she met might be great. Because I even remember when I used to listen to the Nerdist podcast, Chris Hardwick used to praise working with Dan Schneider. So did Yvette Nicole Brown. And they're probably not singing the same song right now. And
I mean, there are people who they want to go down the deep conspiracy theory rabbit hole of who he was connected to and stuff. But I mean, would I go that far? Somebody was mentioning, he did a Head of the Class episode where Christine Hodge's character got amnesia falling off the ferry and then had a thing for his character Dennis. So he kind of went with it, acting like, she was his boyfriend until she realized it was all part of some shit. And it's like, but he didn't write that. That was just, part of the show. That was part of what the writers were doing then. He had nothing to do with it. He didn't say, give me something where I make out with Christine Hodge. No.
Or maybe that was the episode him and Brian Robbins wrote.
No, I've seen the one that they wrote. It was kind of tame. But I do remember an interview before he got all accused of shit, where he said that one of the things about him wanting to get into screenwriting was because he felt him and Robbins could write better material than what the writers on Head of the Class were doing.
Well, watching old episodes, that's true. Obvious. So I'm just like, I'm here for more revelations, and I hope justice can be done. But while this is a news story for now, I don't know in the long run, other than being information, what it's going to do. I hope Brian Peck burns in hell and hopefully never works in Hollywood again. But the sad case is he probably will.
Yeah, and Dan Schneider says he has some deal worked out elsewhere, but I think that's bullshit. Especially after this. I don't think anybody wants to deal with him ever again.
I don't know. It's like Kevin Spacey. It's sort of like he works, kind of, and can afford his lifestyle, but you never really see anything other than his yearly Christmas videos.
But people don't hire Mel Gibson for big blockbusters anymore.
But he works.
When Marky Mark is willing to give him a bone, but that's about it.
He was in, what was that action film with Frank Grillo where he played the villain?
Exactly. That went straight to video.
Work is work. Mel Gibson's working more than, what's his name, Kevin Spacey is.
There's work where you can find it, but there's also work when it's just, being on a dog show. I
mean, he always threatens his sequel to A Passion of Christ. And the worst part,
sound afraid people will fund it.
Well, if Trump becomes president, trust me, I think that will be made.
Knock on wood, that doesn't happen.
Well, We'll see. I hope it doesn't, but it doesn't seem to be stopping. So what are your final words on Quiet on the Set, the dark side of kids TV?
It's an uncomfortable watch, but it's a necessary need, and I hope it does enact some kind of change, at least at Nickelodeon, that they can prevent this kind of shit from ever happening again.
Well, considering Nickelodeon barely makes any live shows anymore,
Yeah,
it's all like cartoons.
It's only SpongeBob episodes and maybe like some other cartoons, but the live action shows barely any now.
Maybe because of Dan Schneider.
Yeah.
I definitely think this is a must see for people, and get your information straight from trusted sources who lived through it. It's very uncomfortable watching it. I would suggest make it a 2-night event, like watch part 1 and 2, and then watch 3 and 4 the next night, so you have 24 hours to kind of calm down. And because it was definitely a very hard sit. And that ends this week's business. But as you know, we always have unfinished business. So until next time, we bid you adieu.